The humid air of Guadalcanal hung thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and cordite on August 21, 1942. In the pre-dawn darkness, Japanese Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto crouched behind a fallen mahogany tree, his hands trembling as he gripped his Arisaka rifle. The metallic taste of fear coated his tongue, while tropical insects buzzed incessantly around his sweat-soaked uniform. Somewhere in the impenetrable jungle ahead, American voices carried on the breeze, casual, confident, almost leisurely. Yamamoto had been taught that these Western soldiers were soft, undisciplined, lacking the spiritual purity that would guarantee Japanese victory. In less than an hour, he would discover how catastrophically wrong his commanders had been. The sound that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life began as a distant mechanical growling, like some primordial beast awakening from slumber. Then came the roar, a sustained thunderous cascade of death that would shatter not only the morning silence, but the very foundations of Japanese military doctrine. The M1919 Browning machine gun had arrived in the Pacific, and with it came a revelation that would echo through the corridors of the Imperial War Ministry in Tokyo. American industrial might was not a myth, but a terrifying reality that could rain steel at 500 rounds per minute. This moment on Guadalcanal represented far more than a tactical engagement between opposing forces. It was the collision of two fundamentally different philosophies of warfare, two distinct visions of human capability, and two irreconcilable concepts of national destiny. The Japanese Empire had built its military strategy on the belief that spiritual strength, disciplined sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to the emperor could overcome any material disadvantage. The Yamato spirit, they believed, was invincible against Western decadence and mechanical dependence. But as that first M1919 opened fire in the Solomon Islands, it announced the arrival of a different kind of power, one that combined technological innovation with democratic ideals, industrial capacity with individual initiative, and mass production with tactical flexibility. The M1919 Browning machine gun was not merely a weapon, it was the physical manifestation of American industrial democracy in action. Designed by John Moses Browning in 1919, refined through decades of peacetime innovation, and mass-produced in factories from Connecticut to California, this machine gun represented everything the Axis powers had underestimated about American society. While Japanese and German military theorists had dismissed American soldiers as pampered and undisciplined, they had failed to comprehend the revolutionary implications of a society that could arm its citizens with the most advanced weapons technology had yet produced. Lieutenant Yamamoto had been indoctrinated to believe that Japanese soldiers possessed an inherent superiority born of Bushido, the way of the warrior. His training had emphasized that one Japanese soldier was worth 10 Americans, that spiritual purity would triumph over material abundance, and that the emperor's divine blessing guaranteed victory regardless of odds. These beliefs were not merely propaganda but fundamental pillars of Japanese military culture, reinforced through brutal training regimens, ritual ceremonies, and constant indoctrination. When Yamamoto landed on Guadalcanal with the 17th Army, he carried with him the absolute conviction that American forces would crumble before the disciplined fury of Imperial troops. The reality he encountered would prove devastatingly different. As dawn broke over Henderson Field that August morning, Yamamoto and his comrades launched what they believed would be a decisive assault against the American perimeter. Japanese intelligence had suggested they were facing a demoralized enemy, short on supplies and weakened by months of fighting in unfamiliar terrain. What they actually confronted was a defensive line, anchored by weapons they had never imagined possible. The M1919 Browning that opened fire from the American positions could sustain rates of fire that defied Japanese understanding of battlefield dynamics. At 500 rounds per minute, this single weapon could deliver more firepower than an entire Japanese infantry squad armed with bolt-action rifles. But the true shock was not simply the volume of fire. It was the sustained, methodical precision with which that fire was delivered. Unlike the Japanese light machine guns, which required frequent pauses for barrel changes and ammunition resupply, the M1919 could maintain devastating fire for extended periods, turning advancing infantry into scattered remnants within minutes. The psychological impact proved even more profound than the physical destruction. Japanese military doctrine had prepared soldiers to face individual riflemen, to overcome resistance through superior numbers and unwavering advance. Nothing in their training had prepared them for the industrial-scale killing power of American machine gun tactics. The steady mechanical rhythm of the M1919, that distinctive chug-chug-chug that would become the soundtrack of American advances across the Pacific, represented a kind of warfare that reduced individual courage and spiritual preparation to irrelevance. Historical records from the battle reveal the devastating effectiveness of American machine gun deployment. Marine Corps after-action reports documented that single M1919 positions could halt entire Japanese companies, forcing attackers to ground and breaking the momentum of carefully planned assaults. Japanese survivors interviewed after the war described their shock at encountering weapons that seemed to fire continuously without pause, creating killing fields that made traditional infantry tactics suicidal. But the M1919's impact extended far beyond its immediate tactical applications. This weapon embodied the fundamental advantages of American industrial society, advantages that Japanese leaders had consistently underestimated. The gun's design reflected decades of peacetime innovation, with improvements and refinements developed through civilian competition and military cooperation. Its ammunition was manufactured in quantities that staggered Japanese logisticians, who struggled to supply their forces with basic rifle cartridges. Most importantly, American soldiers were trained to maintain and operate these complex weapons with a level of technical competence that reflected their society's emphasis on mechanical education and individual initiative, and the contrast with Japanese machine gun doctrine could not have been more stark. Japanese forces relied primarily on the Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns, weapons that, while effective in their own right, represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare. These guns were designed for mobility and concealment, reflecting Japanese emphasis on infiltration tactics and surprise attacks. They fired at lower rates, required more frequent ammunition changes, and demanded higher levels of crew coordination. Most critically, Japanese industry could not produce them in the quantities necessary to match American firepower advantages. For Lieutenant Yamamoto, huddled behind his mahogany log as M1919 rounds splintered the wood around him, the theoretical became devastatingly personal. The spiritual superiority he had been taught to believe in seemed irrelevant against the mechanical precision of American fire. His Arisaka rifle, a weapon he had been trained to venerate as the embodiment of Japanese craftsmanship, suddenly felt inadequate against an enemy that could deliver overwhelming firepower with methodical efficiency. The sound of the M1919 became the recurring motif of Japanese military decline in the Pacific. Unlike the sharp crack of rifle fire or the explosive roar of artillery, the machine gun's sustained mechanical rhythm represented something entirely new in warfare: the application of industrial principles to the business of killing. Each burst signified not just individual rounds fired, but the products of vast American factories, the labor of millions of workers, and the technological innovation of a society that had learned to mass-produce precision instruments of war. Japanese military reports from Guadalcanal and subsequent battles repeatedly emphasized the demoralizing effect of American machine gun fire. Officers noted that soldiers who had shown exemplary courage in previous engagements would freeze when confronted with the sustained fire of M1919 positions. The psychological warfare aspect proved as significant as the physical destruction, as Japanese troops began to question the fundamental assumptions upon which their military confidence had been built. The weapon's effectiveness stemmed from more than just its mechanical specifications. The M1919 represented the culmination of American military-industrial innovation, combining advanced metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and battlefield experience into a single, devastatingly effective system. Its .30-06 ammunition was manufactured to tolerances that ensured consistent performance under the most demanding conditions. Its cooling system allowed for sustained fire that Japanese weapons could not match. Its modular design enabled rapid field maintenance by soldiers trained in mechanical principles that reflected American educational priorities. But perhaps most significantly, the M1919 embodied American democratic values in ways that totalitarian societies could not replicate. The weapon's development had involved extensive input from soldiers who would actually use it in combat, reflecting a military culture that valued practical experience over rigid hierarchy. Its manufacturing required skilled workers who were educated, well-paid, and personally invested in producing quality equipment for their fellow citizens serving overseas. The entire system represented a level of civilian-military cooperation that was impossible in societies where individual initiative was subordinated to state control. As the battle for Guadalcanal continued through the autumn of 1942, the M1919's impact became increasingly apparent in Japanese tactical adaptations. Unable to match American firepower directly, Japanese commanders were forced to abandon traditional assault tactics in favor of infiltration strategies that played to their troops' individual skills while avoiding direct confrontation with American machine gun positions. This tactical evolution represented a tacit admission that Japanese military doctrine had failed to anticipate the realities of industrial-age warfare. The weapon's influence extended beyond individual battles to reshape Japanese strategic thinking about the Pacific War. Intelligence reports flowing back to Tokyo painted an increasingly grim picture of American material advantages that Japanese industry could not hope to match. The M1919 became symbolic of a broader technological gap that undermined Japanese confidence in ultimate victory. Military planners who had initially dismissed American fighting capability were forced to confront the reality that their enemies possessed not only superior equipment, but the industrial capacity to produce it in overwhelming quantities. For the American soldiers manning these weapons, the M1919 represented something equally profound: the tangible connection between home front production and battlefield effectiveness. Every round fired had been manufactured by fellow Americans working in factories across the continent. Every mechanical component reflected the skills of workers who understood that their labor directly supported their sons, brothers, and neighbors fighting overseas. This connection between civilian production and military effectiveness created a kind of national unity that totalitarian societies, despite their propaganda, could never truly achieve. The psychological transformation experienced by Japanese soldiers confronting American machine gun fire represented more than tactical adjustment. It constituted a fundamental challenge to their understanding of warfare itself. The Bushido tradition emphasized individual combat prowess, personal courage in the face of death, and spiritual preparation for sacrifice. These values, while admirable in their own context, proved inadequate against weapon systems that reduced individual heroism to statistical irrelevance. Lieutenant Yamamoto's experience became representative of thousands of Japanese soldiers who discovered that courage and spiritual preparation could not overcome technological disadvantage. His post-war memoirs, published decades later, described the profound disillusionment he felt as American machine guns systematically destroyed Japanese attacks that had been planned according to traditional military principles. The steady mechanical rhythm of the M1919 became, in his words, the sound of the future destroying the past. The weapon's tactical employment revealed another crucial American advantage: the democratic military culture that encouraged innovation and adaptation at the squad level. American machine gun teams were trained not just to operate their weapons, but to understand their tactical applications, to coordinate with other units, and to adapt their employment based on battlefield conditions. This flexibility reflected an educational system and military culture that valued individual judgment and initiative, creating soldiers who could maximize their equipment's effectiveness rather than simply following rigid doctrinal prescriptions. Japanese military observers noted this difference in their after-action reports, commenting on the apparent ease with which American units modified their tactics based on local conditions. Where Japanese doctrine emphasized predetermined responses to specific situations, American forces seemed capable of improvising solutions that took advantage of their technological superiority. The M1919 became the focal point of this tactical flexibility, with American units developing innovative employment techniques that maximized the weapon's psychological as well as physical impact. The industrial story behind the M1919 represented Everything that Japanese propaganda had claimed was impossible in democratic societies. According to Axis ideology, democratic nations were too fractured by individual interests to achieve the unity necessary for total war. The reality proved exactly opposite. American factories, operated by free workers earning competitive wages, produced military equipment of higher quality and in greater quantities than any totalitarian society achieved. The Browning machine gun's production history illustrated this democratic advantage perfectly. Manufacturing was distributed across multiple facilities, ensuring that production could continue even if individual plants were damaged. Quality control was maintained through systems that encouraged worker feedback and continuous improvement. Technical innovations developed in one facility were rapidly shared across the entire production network. The result was a weapon system that not only met immediate military requirements, but continued to improve throughout the war based on battlefield experience and production innovations. By the spring of 1943, as American forces launched their offensive across the Central Pacific, the M1919 had become the audible signature of American military power. Its distinctive sound preceded every major amphibious assault, signaling to Japanese defenders that they faced an enemy whose industrial capacity could support sustained, overwhelming firepower. The psychological warfare aspect had become as important as the weapon's direct military effectiveness. Japanese defensive preparations increasingly focused on avoiding direct confrontation with American machine gun positions, leading to the development of complex tunnel systems and underground fortifications designed to neutralize American firepower advantages. These adaptations represented a tacit admission that Japanese forces could no longer compete in conventional surface combat against enemies equipped with industrial-age weapons. The M1919's impact on Japanese military morale extended beyond the soldiers who directly encountered it in combat. Reports of its effectiveness filtered back through the Japanese command structure, creating a crisis of confidence that affected strategic planning at the highest levels. Military leaders who had based their war plans on assumptions of Japanese tactical superiority were forced to confront evidence that their enemies possessed not only better equipment, but the industrial infrastructure to maintain technological advantages indefinitely. The weapon became a symbol of American abundance in ways that Japanese propaganda had never anticipated. Each M1919 represented not just a single gun, but an entire industrial ecosystem capable of producing precision machinery in quantities that defied Japanese comprehension. The ammunition expenditure alone, often thousands of rounds per weapon per day during major engagements, demonstrated a level of material wealth that challenged fundamental Japanese assumptions about resource limitations and wartime sacrifice. American soldiers operating these weapons understood intuitively what their enemies were discovering through bitter experience: that democratic societies possessed inherent advantages in industrial warfare that went beyond simple production capacity. The M1919 reflected not just American manufacturing capability, but American values: the importance of individual initiative, the benefits of technical education, the advantages of cooperative innovation, and the power of free societies to mobilize their citizens' talents for common purposes. As the war progressed and American forces advanced across the Pacific, the M1919's psychological impact often exceeded its immediate tactical effectiveness. Japanese soldiers reported that the sound of American machine guns opening fire had become associated with inevitable defeat, creating a psychological condition that Japanese military psychiatrists began documenting as early as 1943. The weapon's mechanical rhythm represented more than just incoming fire. It signified the approach of an industrial civilization that had learned to apply technological principles to warfare with devastating efficiency. The contrast between American and Japanese approaches to machine gun employment revealed deeper philosophical differences about the nature of warfare itself. Japanese doctrine emphasized the spiritual dimension of combat, viewing individual weapons as extensions of the warrior's soul and fighting capability as ultimately dependent on moral rather than material factors. American doctrine, while not ignoring individual courage and training, recognized that superior equipment properly employed could overcome disadvantages in numbers or position. This philosophical difference became apparent in the training methods used to prepare soldiers for machine gun operations. Japanese crews were taught to view their weapons as sacred instruments requiring ritualized maintenance and employment, according to strict doctrinal guidelines. American crews were educated to understand their weapons' mechanical principles, encouraging experimentation and adaptation based on battlefield conditions. The result was a tactical flexibility that allowed American forces to maximize their technological advantages while Japanese forces remained constrained by doctrinal rigidity. The M1919's effectiveness in jungle warfare particularly challenged Japanese military assumptions. Pre-war doctrine had suggested that thick vegetation and limited visibility would negate American technological advantages, forcing combat back to the individual level, where Japanese spiritual preparation would prove decisive. The reality proved exactly opposite. The machine gun's sustained fire capability made it ideal for controlling jungle clearings, trail junctions, and landing zones, creating killing fields that turned Japanese infiltration tactics into suicide missions. Lieutenant Yamamoto's final encounter with the M1919 came during the Japanese retreat from Guadalcanal in February 1943, as his depleted unit attempted to reach evacuation beaches under cover of darkness. American machine gun positions dominated every approach route. The steady mechanical fire that had first shocked him 6 months earlier now represented the sound of Japanese defeat, methodical, inescapable, and as reliable as the industrial civilization that had produced it. His memoir recorded the profound psychological transformation this experience produced. We had been taught that American soldiers were weak, that their reliance on machines made them inferior to warriors trained in spiritual discipline, but those machines were extensions of a society that had learned to wage war with the precision of a factory and the determination of a free people defending their values. We discovered that democracy was not weakness but a different kind of strength, one that could arm its citizens with weapons we could not match and train them to use those weapons with devastating effectiveness. The M1919's influence extended beyond immediate battlefield applications to reshape American military doctrine for the remainder of the war. Its success validated the concept of overwhelming firepower as a force multiplier, leading to tactical innovations that maximized the weapon's psychological as well as physical impact. American commanders learned to coordinate machine gun fire with artillery and air support, creating integrated killing systems that made traditional infantry tactics obsolete. This doctrinal evolution reflected broader changes in how democratic societies approached warfare. Rather than relying primarily on individual heroism or numerical superiority, American forces developed methods that leveraged their technological and industrial advantages to minimize casualties while maximizing effectiveness. The M1919 became the foundation of this approach, providing the sustained firepower necessary to dominate battlefields while American industrial capacity ensured adequate ammunition, supplies for prolonged operations. The weapons' impact on Japanese strategic thinking became apparent in the defensive preparations undertaken for the anticipated American invasion of the home islands. Japanese planners, having learned to respect American firepower advantages, developed tactics specifically designed to neutralize machine gun positions through suicide attacks and underground warfare. These preparations represented the ultimate admission that conventional tactics could not succeed against enemies equipped with industrial-age weapons and unlimited ammunition supplies. As American forces approached the Japanese home islands in 1945, the M1919 had become more than just a weapon. It was the audible symbol of American victory. Its mechanical rhythm had accompanied every major American advance across the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, representing the steady, inexorable progress of an industrial democracy at war. Japanese civilians who heard American machine guns firing during air raids understood intuitively that they were listening to the sound of their nation's defeat. The weapon's effectiveness had transformed not only tactical employment but strategic understanding of what democratic societies could achieve when properly motivated. The M1919 demonstrated that free peoples could produce weapons superior to those manufactured by totalitarian regimes, could train their citizens to employ those weapons with devastating effectiveness, and could sustain military operations on a scale that defied pre-war assumptions about democratic warfare capabilities. In the end, the M1919 Browning machine gun represented more than technical innovation or tactical advantage. It embodied the industrial expression of democratic values applied to warfare. Every round fired carried with it the labor of free workers, the innovations of competitive industry, and the determination of citizens defending their way of life. Its mechanical rhythm became the soundtrack of liberation, announcing to enemies and allies alike that democracy possessed not only moral authority but the industrial capacity to enforce its principles against any challenge. The thunder that Lieutenant Yamamoto first heard on Guadalcanal echoed across the Pacific for 3 years, growing louder with each American victory, more ominous with each Japanese defeat. It was the sound of the future overtaking the past, of industrial civilization overwhelming feudal traditions, of free societies demonstrating their ultimate superiority over totalitarian alternatives. The M1919 had spoken, and its voice proclaimed a truth that would reshape the post-war world. That democracy, properly armed and determined to defend itself, possessed advantages that no amount of spiritual preparation or military tradition could overcome. In those 500 rounds per minute lay the essence of American power, not merely the ability to produce superior weapons, but the capacity to combine technological innovation with human freedom in ways that totalitarian societies could never match. The machine gun's steady rhythm became the heartbeat of victory, measuring out the steady, inexorable advance of democratic values across a world that would never again underestimate the industrial might of free peoples united in common cause.